Okay, so I was out taking a little bit of a jog and saw a question on Reddit that I just wanted to answer because I find that fun. I'm going to try to answer this real off the cuff. And sorry, I didn't feel like changing clothes because I'm going to get back out there in a second. But the question was about intervals and understanding intervals. And this would probably be better if I had some standard notation, visual aids. I'm a little too lazy to edit that right at the moment, but I just thought this would be fun to try to explain through this off the cuff if I can manage that. And it kind of dovetails with the video I'm about to release. I'm finishing editing about accompaniment excerpts because I talk about transposing things into other keys to practice in different keys, and these same concepts come up in there, and I find this all very fun. A big part of this is that having me personally been trained in common practice period theory, classical theory, and then having to learn more contemporary jazz theory, there are some disconnects in some places, and so I have found a way of thinking about this that's a little more cohesive that works across both of them. And I'm going to have to talk a little bit about things that are technically correct, but you don't actually conceptualize them that way. Like, they are ways to think about it, but I don't think they are the way you should think about it, because long term as a musician, you don't think that way. Like, functional musicians don't conceptualize some of these things certain ways. I'll try to point those out. Let's see if I can do this. I should have made some notes or something, but well, here we go. We're going to think in the key of C because that's the easiest way to visualize all this stuff. So first of all, I would say be able to think scale degrees. I don't know that it's going to really come up, but I always say to be able to think your scale degrees in any key. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. That's just useful in general. That's especially for the transposition stuff. So we'll talk about the diatonic intervals coming up from the root. So C to D, that's a major, major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, and then the octave, perfect ninth, and so on. It doesn't matter that much beyond there. So the way that I like to think about it is the same way if you look at an individual interval, it's the same way you look at an individual chord symbol. In that there's a bit of an order of operations for you to correctly identify what that interval is. So in this case, like if we'll talk about chord symbols real quick. If I see a C on the staff, like C chord, that's C major triad, I know what that is. And if it says C minor, I know it's this. Now, I know it's instantly that, but there is a small order of operations in there. I'm thinking in the key of the major root. I'm thinking in C major. When I see that C minor chord, I'm seeing C, so C major. I'm thinking that scale, and I'm doing that 1, 3, 5 in that key. There's those scale degree numbers. And then I'm lowering the third because the minor on a chord symbol tells me lower the third, and I do that. This matters because chord symbols are an island. This has nothing to do with standard notation, but chord symbols are an island. They do not exist relative to a key. So if I'm in the key of C, I'm playing, the song is in the key of C, and I have a chord symbol that's for F, and it says F7. I know that means this. We're not going to get into the details of it, but that's an F dominant 7. E flat is not in the key of C. It doesn't matter. Even if the song's in the key of C, the chord symbol F7 means this. It means F dominant 7, and it's irrelevant what the key is. And that is going to matter for the way that you think of intervals too. The problem is all of these things relate, and you do think about harmonic relations. That has to do with Roman numerals and all this other stuff. That's a whole different thing. But while they do have relationships between chords, the chords individually are islands. And the same thing happens here with intervals. Intervals are islands. They can be read as islands. So if you want to know what an interval is, one interval, without any context, you basically will read it the same way, where you look at the lowest note, and then you look at the higher note, and you go, okay, well, that's a major sixth because it's C up to A. And then if it's C up to A flat, because I lowered that, that's a minor sixth. So here's where things get weird, is because we'll talk about perfect fifths. Now, fifths and fourths are perfect. I'm not going to get into why they're called perfect. It's a historical thing. We're just not going to go there. But I could have a perfect fifth, and I could raise that fifth up a half step. That's an augmented fifth. But didn't we just say this is a minor sixth? Yeah, we did. It matters how it's written. So you would look at your lowest note, C, and your top note. If it's an A, then that's a sixth, some sort of sixth. Is it diatonic in that key? That's a major sixth. Do I lower that A? Then that's a minor sixth. Is it C up to G? Okay, that's a fifth. Do I raise it a half step? Is it G sharp, C to G sharp? That's an augmented fifth now, but it's some kind of fifth if it's this. So then that can work for anything, because you can take a note in a key and basically compare it to the diatonic note and then make the adjustment. So in diatonically, we got major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, an octave, like I talked about before. So if it's one of those, so this is a seventh of a sort. Is it diatonic to the key? Yes, that's a major seventh. Do I lower it? Okay, that's a minor seventh. You could also say this is a dominant seventh. It's kind of complicated because it's part of a chord, but that's, if you're curious about interval stuff, if you're going to see that term, that's what that means. When I was talking about this little thing here, where the minor sixth and the augmented fifth, these notes are enharmonic, A flat and G sharp. That's the different spellings. They're the same note. That's what's called enharmonic. That matters. So let's talk about, we already talked about augmented. That's raising that, right? Diminished is basically lowering it. So if I went from here and it is some type of a fifth, but then I lowered it to a G flat, now that is a diminished fifth. You could also have that same note as an augmented fourth if it's C up to F sharp. So C to F is a fourth interval. Raise it because it's not diatonic. Now that is an augmented fourth. You can also do this in really weird ways. We'll talk about the one that matters. Well, it's the one you see the most. That is the diminished seventh. So there's my seventh. Diatonically, it's major. Lower it. That's a minor seventh. Lower it again. That is a diminished seventh, but only if I write it as C up to B double flat. C to B double flat. So on the page it is a seventh, a type of seventh. It's double flatted. That's a diminished seventh. This one's kind of complicated because like that's part of this diminished seventh chord. The thing is, these days in classical music, everybody would write it the theoretically correct way: C, E flat, G flat, B double flat, because it's the chords are stacks of thirds. So you have to have some sort of C, E, G, and B. You lower the third, you lower the fifth, and you double lower, you diminish the seventh. So you have this stack of thirds, and that's the way it would be written, and you have to write B double flat. In modern music, most of the time when I see diminished chords written, they would just write it as C, E flat, G flat, A, just straight up A. It's still a diminished seventh chord, a fully diminished seventh chord. They just don't write it that way most of the time because it's hard to read, you know, like there's a theoretically correct way and then there's the like, does it matter way. There are times where it matters and it's just, that's too deep into the weeds to get into. There are other ways that you can have really weird intervals that don't make any sense. So I could have this third and I could write C to E. So that's a third, but then C to E sharp. It's an augmented third technically. You don't see that one a lot. One you see a slightly more because it'll be some fraction of another chord would be like if I had a C up to E and then I lowered it twice. So this looks like C to D, but on a page, see, this is where I really need sheet music up here. But if I lowered an E and I double flatted the E, that would be a diminished third. sure, whatever, cool story, bro. Like, there are theory reasons contextually why you would do that, um, but it just doesn't, like, you don't want to think of it that way. So my weird thing about thinking in the key of the major, the major key of the root of whatever a thing is, or the lowest note in this case for intervals, it just works all the time. No matter what, no matter where you're at, this always works. That's why I kind of like it. So you can pick any two notes, and regardless of the context of any other notes around them, you can say this note to this note is this interval. And it really helps you understand those intervals always. It always works. It's not a thing where it's like, well, the context, this is kind of like, no, it always works. Context matters, and you need to be able to think about context. But as far as being able to identify intervals, which ultimately isn't super important, but for doing that, being able to do them independently matters. So, the other thing is there are diatonically occurring minor thirds in C. So C up to E, that's a major third, but D up to F and E up to G, those are minor thirds. So you wouldn't actually think of it this way, but you could do it conceptually to make sure it always works. So D up to F, you think in the key of the major key of the root, which is D major, right? Well, that's sloppy. You're lowering that. Same thing with E major. You're thinking that, the major third, and you're lowering it in this minor third. You won't actually think through that, just like I don't think through it with chord symbols, but that is sort of the idea. It always works between any two intervals. Now, in the key of C, you could memorize all of your intervals, like all of the different, like, what are the different thirds? What are the qualities of them? That doesn't tell you much. Understanding how the intervals are built matters more than just memorizing, oh, C to E is a major, and this is a minor third, major third, major third, minor third. Don't try to memorize that and then try to memorize, perfect fourth and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's a mess. Like, what is this? Like, if you started doing all your fourths diatonically and tried to memorize them, like, as you end up with a million things to memorize. But if you just understand conceptually the concept of keys and then what you have to do to intervals to change them, then it makes a lot more sense. Another thing I would say to not do, this is a thing I did when I very, very first started theory, like forever ago. So like a minor third, I would think, because I didn't play piano at all then, I would think in terms of half steps. And the thing is, it frustrates me because some theory books actually still write it this way. Fuck them for that. But they would talk about it in half steps. So C, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So a major third is 4 half steps. A minor third is 3 half steps. And I used to have to do that because I wasn't even fast at reading multiple notes on the page at one time. So I used to have all these memorized in terms of like how many half steps it was from C up to, A or something. Like, don't do that. Like, that is not how, that is useless. That is a skill that I got, and then I have, like, once I actually understood theory, never went back to that. It's not the way that you actually conceptualize music. You think about music in terms of concepts and keys, or context and keys, how things are related, and that matters. Now, granted, I'm saying for the sake of just understanding intervals as islands, you kind of need to take them out of context so that you can correctly identify them. And over time, you'll just get to where you just know what the different intervals are. But the problem is, I feel like a lot of teachers, because it makes sense to always think in the context of the key, like, it would be dumb, like, literally, it's dumb, the thing I said earlier, where you go from, E up to G, and then you have to think, oh, okay, I think my E major scale, and then I lower this, like, that is dumb. That's a really dumb way to think about it. But it is 100% correct all the time. And in real context, you won't think of it that way. You won't. You'll think about your intervals. But if you actually are trying to memorize, like, distances between notes, like, that's a bad way to go about it. It's no different than the half step thing that I just did. That's dumb. and then just like trying to memorize all the different qualities of fifths, all the different qualities of sixths. You just need to understand how it all relates. You know, I don't know. Anyway, I think I'm going to cut it there because like I'm going off the rails here. Hopefully that slightly off the cuff explanation is a little bit helpful. So, bye.